waste too much time, actually. I think we should get started, really, because there's so much to say and so little time to say it. So just before we get started, and while everybody's still joining us, let me start off with a few kind of boring, usual suspect housekeeping items. So all of the attendees, you guys are all on mute, and I'm afraid you're going to stay that way, sorry, but please put in your questions and your comments and your chat into either the Q&A box or to the chat box, because it's so nice to be able to include comments and discussion on what everybody's talking about as we go. We always try and make these sessions as informal, really, and as kind of collaborative as we possibly can. We can't answer any really client-specific or kind of personal data, questions that include a lot of specific details about you or your clients. But if you do have that type of thing, then send it to us afterwards. And we'll be happy to try and be helpful over email if we can. The session is being recorded. It will be available on the OWL immigration website later. And just a big shout out to my OWL community. I always forget to do this, so I want to comment on my little forum that I have on my OWL website, which is full of amazing people such as these guys here, who come together and talk and be helpful to one another about mobility and specifically in the field of immigration. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce the session and ask these beautiful panelists to introduce themselves. So today we are talking about vaccine passports and what that means for the world of global mobility. And just to clear it up right at the beginning, we are talking about vaccine passports in the context of international travel. So we are not talking about whether you need a so-called passport or a certificate to be able to go to a sporting event or a restaurant or a bar or anything like that. That is extremely interesting, but we can't really take that in today. So we're talking about international travel and the need to have a so-called vaccine passport for that. And we have this incredible group of people. So I want to ask them to introduce themselves. So Adrian, please state your name and purpose.
Thanks, Sophie. Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Adrian Hyzler. I am the Chief Medical Officer at Healix, which is a medical and security risk management solution for companies and governments. And nice to meet you all. Hope to be able to answer some questions about how these vaccine passports will work.
Thank you. And Voon. Oh, Voon, you're on mute.
Hi, I'm Voon. I'm the managing partner for Voon Associates and running the immigrations consultancy in Singapore and the APAC region. Thank you.
Thanks, Voon, and thanks for staying up late as well, which I always make you do, so thank you.
No worry.
Maria.
Hi. Hi, everybody. Before I say who I am, I just want to say something on the old community that you just said, Sophie, because I think that maybe people don't know about it, that if you're an immigration specialist out there, I found it a great tool that whenever I have a question that, you feel very lonely when you have an immigration question and you are thinking, what is I just want some brainstorming of other specialists around, and you don't want to just start writing emails and asking anybody. You can go in the old OWL immigration site, and you can just pose your question there, and of course contribute to other discussions. So I just wanted to make that clear, Sophie, because maybe somebody doesn't.
Thank you, Maria.
Really
I will give you your £10 later.
So this is Maria. Hi, everybody. I am Maria Kouri. I am the Managing Director of Corporate Relocations Greece. So I can help you with anything you need to know about Greece.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask you all, not just about Greece, but also about the EU in general.
Sorry,
because I couldn't fit
of course,
27 people.
Yeah, forget what I just said.
But the Greece is important.
Again? Yeah.
The Greece is important because it's such a, I think it's so important to think about this in the context of countries which are so dependent on tourism. I mean, that's like such a huge part of it. So I felt like, anyway, Liam.
Good afternoon, Sophie, and good afternoon all. My name is Liam Brennan, and I'm the CEO of GT Global Tracker. And we provide technical solutions and software for business travelers and remote workers. So we provide it through corporates, through tax companies. So a lot of our technology is going to become a key part of the future, because pre-trip assessment is likely to be a key part of restarting any travel and then helping to locate business travelers. So where there's always been a sort of a head in the sand approach to technology and business travel in the past, COVID has accelerated that move towards automating and using technology to manage your business travelers. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about the certificate later on and how that's likely to impact that travel and ultimate entry to your destination.
Totally, absolutely. And obviously the digital side of things is huge. I wish we had, you know, I mean, people keep telling me that 1 hour long webinars are old hat these days, but I feel like we need probably 3 or 4 hours, you know, maybe we should just keep on talking for 3 or 4 hours. Anyway, so without further ado, Adrian, I was going to ask you, so one of the reasons I actually did this webinar in the first place is normally I do webinars on immigration things, which I actually know something about, but this time I felt like I personally am really quite ignorant and clueless about what all of this is about, and about what the heck a vaccine passport even, I mean, it's obviously not a passport, you know, we all know what a passport is, and it's got nothing to do with the vaccine. So please, can you tell us what's going on?
Sure. I mean, just to open up with what's going on generally around the world, I think WHO warned us this week that there are 4.5 million cases a week being recorded at the moment. A year ago, when it was the height of the pandemic in the first wave, there were 500,000. So we've got 9-10 times as many cases now, and that's 14-15 months after the start of the pandemic. And that is quite extraordinary that after all we've learned over the last year, that we're still getting so many cases. Unfortunately, we've got vaccines, which is just a remarkable thing. And a year ago, no one would have predicted we'd have vaccines by now, let alone at least half a dozen or more actually being injected into people's arms. As of today, we will cross the 800 millionth vaccine going into someone's arm around the world, which again is phenomenal. But only 38 million of those are being distributed by COVAX, which is the CEPI, Gavi, WHO organization that's trying to get vaccines to low middle income countries in an equitable way. So 1 in 4 of high income populations have been vaccinated, but only 1 in 500 of lower income countries have been vaccinated. So there is a huge inequity in where vaccines are going. But with an aim to try and get travel moving, the vaccine passport concept is in almost every news stream at the moment. This week, it has just been in my inbox all over the place. And it's a concept. I must just say from the beginning that the vaccine passport name, I've always found a little bit inflammatory because it has a concept of privilege, of inequity, that people who can get vaccines can have passports. If you can't get a vaccine, you can't have a passport. And one thing that the EU has certainly done is to try and distance itself from the idea of a passport and to call it a digital green certificate. Now, the point of that is that they've not only focused on whether you've had a vaccine or not, and really it's whether you've been fully vaccinated, so 2 weeks after your second dose, or with the Johnson & Johnson, your first dose, but whether you've actually had COVID in the last 6 months, which gives you natural immunity, which is equivalent, better than a vaccine. But also for people who haven't had it, can't get a vaccine, they're able to get a test. And if they've tested negatively within 48, 72 hours, that is also part of the digital green certificate, which is a record of whether you're immune or not. Now, obviously, whether you're vaccinated or had the disease gives you antibodies immunity. If you've had a test, it just means you are not actually carrying the disease at the time the test was taken. So
yeah,
it gives
a completely different thing. It's completely separate category.
Exactly. Yeah. But what it's trying to do is say that you're less likely to transmit the disease to other people, which is the aim of the certificate. Now, the problem from a medical point of view is that we've got different vaccines around the world and different efficacies. So the Pfizer, the Moderna vaccines are up to 95% efficacious in stopping you getting any kind of disease. Whereas some of the other vaccines, I mean, the Chinese vaccines have come into question in the last couple of days as to whether Sinovac, Sinopharm are actually as effective as we thought, and may need an extra dose on top of the 2 that you already get to give it higher efficacy. So we're not sure about the efficacy across the board. we're not sure how efficacious the vaccines are against variants. And we know that the variant discovered in South Africa is certainly resistant to vaccines in general. And you're going to have less efficacy of the antibodies against that variant, which is starting to spread around the world. Other variants may emerge as time goes on, and they certainly are doing. And in Brazil, there's a horrendous situation with the P1 and P2 that are meaning that half of ITUs are populated with under 40-year-olds in intensive care because of these variants. Another issue is how long does the immunity from the vaccine last? How long does duration of immunity last after being infected? At the moment, we're looking at 6 to 8 months, because that's the time we can measure. We won't know if it's a year until a year's gone by. And that's going to have to be an ongoing situation. So you can't have a digital immunity certificate indefinitely. And the other thing is that, are we going to require boosters? So with the variant, it's quite likely that certain populations, at least, maybe the vulnerable people, will need a booster later on this year, so that their immunity, which is less than younger people anyway, is boosted against the variants, which may cause breakthroughs. So these are all issues with how this certificate actually works. Now, a lot of people talk about the yellow fever certificate that's been around, the yellow card's been around for a long time. Now, there is differences here in that the yellow fever vaccine is well established, it's very effective, and it's a one vaccine and you're done. And that's lifelong now. So it's a lot easier with this little yellow card you have, which was just about to be digitized just before this pandemic. That was the World Health Organization aim. It didn't actually work, I don't think, because the pandemic took over. But certainly digital immunity certificates are just sensible. I don't see any reason, and Liam will go through the issues with privacy and hopefully satisfy people that they can be private. The other issues with the certificate is that you've got to adhere to what we have GDPR regulations in the EU, which means that you collect the minimum amount of data, you store it for as short a time as possible, and that is deleted once you don't need it anymore. And also you've got to make sure that that's very secure. So those are all issues that maybe Liam will cover, but you've got to make sure that this is not impending on your privacy, which is a big issue with people who aren't keen on these certificates. The one other thing is that these cannot just be on a smartphone app. For people who've got smartphones, it's great, it's convenient, it's like an airline pass with your boarding passes electronically. Only one in five Americans don't have smartphones or access to them. So you've got to be able to have a paper certificate as well. And again, all of them have to be secure. So that's my thoughts from the outset. I don't want to take up too much time, but I will certainly be around afterwards to answer any questions or any points that come up. So I'll pass it back to you, Sophie, in case you've got any questions to ask.
Thanks. So basically, I guess what we're saying, one of the things I have found interesting with this whole thing is that people talk about COVID vaccine passports as if it were going to be possible to go and apply for some universal document, like a lovely little book that you would be able to wave around at an airport and show people and they'd let you into their country. And maybe possibly, when we've been talking about this in preparation for this webinar, we've thought, I guess, maybe, but I think we're so far away from that, aren't we? There's no such thing as a vaccine passport. There is beginning to be such a thing. There is certainly such a thing as evidence that you've been vaccinated. There is certainly such a thing as being able to prove that you've had a vaccine, and there is certainly historical precedent for having vaccination certificates in order to get into other countries, like with the yellow fever card. But there is definitely no such thing as a widely understood and a broadly applicable method of showing that you are immune to or do not have COVID that works everywhere, right?
Yeah. We don't know that if you're vaccinated, if you've had COVID, that you don't transmit.
Yeah, it might not even. Yeah.
And in fact, you do transmit. We don't know what proportions, 50 to 60, 80%, maybe reduction transmission. But there are two concepts. One is having the immunity certificate, and one is what the conditions that each government places on their country.
Yeah.
So I think Iceland have said, if you're vaccinated, there are no restrictions to you entering our country. And you know, different countries have different aims. And as we said, if you're in the southern, in the Mediterranean, or if you're in the Far East and you depend on tourism, then you're going to be well in favor of these certificates, because it's a way of trying to get people confident that they can travel with other people, and also that they are happy to go into those destinations for tourism, which everyone wants, really. That's what we've
exactly. That's the thing, right? I mean, it feels like something like this should be years and years in the making, but there just simply aren't even, you know, weeks or months. You know, it's been a year that people have been shut. You know,
everything's had to be accelerated, whether it's the vaccine approval, and you know, we've got to an incredible stage. Now the next part is how we use the vaccines, and governments are struggling with how to do that. So the Israeli government said, if you get the green pass through being vaccinated, you'll have all these privileges, and in different countries you can use that as you know, a way of getting the last people who are the hardest to get vaccinated, because they're the younger group who they're not threatened so much by COVID. The vulnerable people,
they're not scared they're going to die.
The low hanging fruit, but getting the other people is harder. Using privileges is a way of trying to get those last people, and Israel have certainly done that successfully.
And it is about privilege. So let's look at some sort of practical things that are actually happening in real life right now. So Voon, tell us what's going on in terms of, and I think we should maybe at this point stop saying vaccine passport and start saying evidence of vaccination or vaccination certificate. Or so what is going on in Singapore and also the surrounding area? And I'm particularly interested, I think a lot of people are interested in China, and this need to have the Chinese vaccine before you can come.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm sure, you know, there have been, you know, much talks about, you know, among the countries in APAC to, you know, have a standard vaccine certificate in order to revitalize tourism and hospitality industry in the region, you know, over the past few months. Domestically, I think most APAC countries who started the vaccination program have already issued vaccine certificate to facilitate internal movement and travel, you know, over the past couple of months. But we haven't seen much progress in of an established cross-country model, other than some bilateral talks between countries to mutually recognize each other's vaccine certificate. Singapore is it's leading the pack. I mean, we established several travel bubbles with country with low to moderate infection rate. In bilateral talks with country with in establishing travel corridors for vaccinated passengers. This country includes, I think, as you heard, Malaysia, Indonesia, the close neighbors, Brunei, and Australia, New Zealand, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. One of the key elements of the discussions on mutual recognitions of vaccine certificates. This certificate can be physical or digital and had to be secure, tamper-proof, and verifiable, which is a challenge at the moment. I think each one has a different standard, and it's very difficult to find a common standard to move forward with this vaccination certificate in the region.
So this is, and do you think this is to open up travel in the region because travel in the region is important, and you know the neighbouring countries want to support one another's and their own economies, right? So it's not based on having had the same vaccine; it's based on, you know, we want to work with our neighbouring country, Malaysia, or with Indonesia or Vietnam or other.
Yeah, I think it's on a need-to-be basis, because I think if you look at the situation in Singapore, there are 200,000 migrant workers that comes in daily, and which is now stuck in Singapore that couldn't travel back to Malaysia. And that, as we speak this afternoon, there was a news that, you know, the Malaysian Prime Minister is going to come to Singapore on the 4th May to talk about, recognizing the vaccination certificate of each country, to start opening the borders for people to commute daily.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and if you look at Thailand, I mean, interestingly, if you look at Thailand, then, that's the other extreme, that, they just want to open the borders so that there are more tourists to come in to basically to revitalize the economies of the country. Although the take-up rate or coverage rate in Thailand is still very low, and with infections going up on almost 1,000 cases a day. Yeah, so that's a worry.
And how does it work the other way around? So if you're from Singapore and you want to go to Thailand, is the Singaporean government okay with that? I mean, presumably a vaccine, a proof of vaccination would be helpful both for people going out and for people coming home again.
They are not stopping people from leaving the country, unlike Australia.
Or the UK.
Or the UK. But you can come back, but then you still have to go through the 2 weeks of the quarantine,
even if you've had the vaccine.
Yeah, even you had the vaccine. I guess it's the traveling at this moment in Asia, it really depends on the destination country rules rather than the home country.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us about China, Voon. Like what is going on with China? If you want to go to China, am I right that you have to have had a Chinese-made vaccine? This is what we've been reading about.
Yeah, China announced in March that it was easing the visa application rules for foreigners inoculated with Chinese-made vaccine. So in the market, everyone was saying that, oh, that is so much of a vaccine diplomacy in the region, and they didn't come down with any solid process or rules or regulations so that people would know what to do, right? And there are many countries in Asia that are not using the Chinese vaccine, and it's funny that they actually send the vaccine to Singapore without even without even being tested. It was like, here comes the vaccine, use it.
And they just sent it without being asked for it. Right?
Yeah, and it was announced. The funny thing, it was first announced in the Chinese embassy website, and then a day later, the local paper reported it and said that we are not using it yet. We still need to get data to test it until it's safe. Then we will use the Chinese vaccine. Until today, we have not heard anything about using the Sinovac vaccine in Singapore. In Asia, if you look at the APAC country, the country that currently using the Chinese vaccine in Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Cambodia. Over in the America side, Peru, Colombia, and Chile. And on the EMEA side, it's UAE, Turkey, Hungary, Serbia, Morocco, and Egypt. Right.
So
and
for China, so the Chinese, the sort of equivalent of the vaccine passport or the vaccine certificate in China is evidence that you've been vaccinated with a Chinese-made vaccine of some sort, right? And you need this for why? In order to get a visa or in order to avoid quarantine once you, I think it's to get a visa, I think you were saying, right?
Get a visa. It's solely for the visa process. I mean, you still have to go through the pre-test and the quarantine requirement if you enter the country. And this visa is only for business and official travel anyway. So it's not really open up to tourism at the moment.
It's not for tourism. But if I wanted to come on a business trip to China, I would have to go and get myself vaccinated.
But how do you get it? Because it's not available in the market.
Yeah, I'm not allowed
and
it.
Who is
Adrian,
going to certify?
You're about to say something. Yeah, who's going to? How am I going to get it? Also, what if
who is going to certify it?
Say I've been AstraZeneca already. How do I then now? I don't want to put another one on top. Do I? I don't think.
We have been asked how do we get the Chinese vaccine? And
yes, okay.
You can't get it in the UK. It's not available. You can get another vaccine. It's not going to harm you to have a third vaccine that is one of the Sinopharm Sinovacs, but you just can't get hold of them because they're only in countries that have links with China, and China have given to certain countries, which is great to spread the vaccine around the world. But it comes with with strings.
So that
Yeah.
makes us, our team in China make a very detailed research and actually did a webinar or did a seminar in MChen's Shanghai. Most of the people attending is asking, how do we get a certificate? Even if you can get the vaccine, right? Unless you come from a country that's already have a agreement with China to use the Chinese vaccine, right? Otherwise, this free visa thing or visa application thing is useless to country that are not administering the Chinese vaccine.
And what do you think? I mean, you might not want to comment on this because I didn't warn you that I was going to ask it. But what do you think? Is it a long term? I mean, how long? If I were China, and presumably this will be required for work visas as well, right? For Z visas. If I were China, I don't know if I would continue to insist on. I mean, do you think there's sort of legs in it?
Well, personally, I think they are trying to pressure the country to take certain amount of the vaccine, so that if for whatever reason that you need to make the trip to China, the easiest way is just probably just to have the vaccine,
because they can trust
on top of what you already have, right?
On top of what you have.
Yeah. And in China, I mean, they started the vaccine certificate using the WeChat platform, which will have the test result as well as the vaccination record at the moment.
So is the WeChat in China, is that the same thing? Because I remember quite early on in the pandemic, there was the Chinese were leading the way with this kind of app that you could have on your phone for traveling within China, for being allowed into places. It's the same. It's the same platform.
It's the same app, yes. So they call this the International Travel Health Certificate under the WeChat platform.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at the any of the multilateral agreement, I think the only one that has started in discussion was the ASEAN country with the 10 countries in Southeast Asia. But I think it's still a long way to go. One of the key concern is basically data privacy, because we couldn't even agree on a framework like the GDPR in the EU. Without that, I think it's going to be difficult to implement a common standard or for data privacy for such a data.
This is the thing, right?
Vaccine
I mean,
passport.
I think that the huge difference between a yellow fever, I mean, like you said, Adrian, a yellow fever vaccination card, you get your vaccination once and then it lasts for a long time. So it's a lot easier and people understand it a lot better anyway. But surely the other thing is that it's a piece of paper which you either have in your pocket or you don't have it in your pocket, not a piece of digital data. But we shouldn't run out of time. We should talk about the EU, because the EU has been very keen on ensuring data privacy. I mean, that I've read so much stuff about data privacy with you, but Maria, tell us about it, because you've got all of the scoop on what is this digital green certificate and how do you get it and what's the point of it and should I be scared about it?
Okay.
And can I please come to Greece soon?
I will tell you all about it, don't worry. So the digital green, first of all, it's wrong to talk about a vaccine passport. So we talk about, at least in Europe, about the digital green certificate. And this is mainly because the European Union needs to secure the fundamental right of the people moving.
The freedom of movement, right?
The freedom of movement between the member states. So what is the digital green certificate? Because there have been a lot of discussions, and now there is this proposed regulation about the digital green certificate. So let me tell you in simple words. So if you are staying in any of the member states, you can visit a certified hospital or a certified health authority or a certified test center, and you can apply and get the green certificate. So it means, I'm starting the other way around, but anyway, it means that anybody who is an EU national or a non-EU residing in the EU, or even a visitor in the EU can get it. Now, how you can get it? You have to be as Adrian said it, I will repeat it very quickly. You either have to be vaccinated, or have a negative test result, or have a recovery certificate. Now, of course, the European Union has some specific, I'm sorry, has some specific vaccines that they have been accepted, but it's up to the member states to also accept any other vaccines. But the digital green certificate is according to the EU standards. So you can get it. It will be in a digital form. You can either get it on your smartphone or on a piece of paper. It will have a QR code, and the QR code will secure the new concept that it's called the interoperability.
Interoperability.
Interoperability between the member states, because the EU will create a gateway where all the digital signatures of these certified centers that I told you, hospital, tests, or public authorities, they will have a sample of the digital signature. I'm very happy that Liam is nodding, so I said it correctly. So they will have a sample of this signature. So this secures also the GDPR, because they will not have, all the member states will not have my personal information that I have been vaccinated. But if I get it from my hospital around the corner that I have been vaccinated, my hospital will keep all the record. But the hospital signature will be all across the member states. Does it make sense?
So your hospital keeps your health record. That doesn't go off to Brussels or somewhere scary like that. But the fact that your hospital is a real hospital and is believed to know what they're doing, that is secured and sort of certified by
the
this
hospital.
New gateway.
Exactly. The hospital follows some rules. I mean, there has to be a specific negative test that it's called. There is some names, you know, and specific vaccinations that are accepted by the European Union. So then I will be able to get this certificate, and this will allow me to travel all over Europe, and all the restrictions that the member states may have, like extra testing or quarantine, will not be applicable, because I will have the digital green certificate. Does it make sense?
So in the EU, the idea of the digital green certificate in the EU is that it will facilitate travel rather than permit it, right? So it means you don't have to do the quarantine or extra testing or whatever might be required, rather than the Chinese example, which is to say you can't get a visa at all unless you've had this. So I could. And also, so if I'm a non-EU person, if I'm American living in the US and I want to come to Europe, the EU, can I still, how do I get it then? Because presumably my hospitals are not going to be in this gateway. This is going to be a matter between the member states, right?
If I have, first of all, the European Union is very open. The proposal that the European Union are putting in place are very open to all the global initiatives that are currently being discussed and being made by the World Health Organization and so on. And they encourage also other countries to accept the digital green certificate. Now, to your question, you cannot get, I don't think that you will be able to get it from your home country if it is the US, except if this is further discussed, and there will be some certified places that according to the standards of the EU, they will be able to issue certificates. But if I understand correctly, is that if you manage to visit the European Union following the rules of the member state that you are coming, then you will be able to apply if you fulfill the requirements.
Because I can visit anyway, right? I can visit, do my quarantine, and then maybe if I plan to be a repeat visitor or a frequent traveller.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
if, for example, there are countries in the EU like Spain that doesn't have a quarantine yet, right now. So you can visit it without a quarantine. Of course, there are other countries like Greece that does have a quarantine right now, but this is a measure that they're still thinking of what to do now that the tourist season is coming.
Yeah. So that's my next question to you: is does this thing exist already, and will it be there in time for my summer holiday in Greece?
So no, it does not exist. It is a draft. It's a proposed regulation. They will have more discussions. They expect it to be they have to fix this gateway. There's a lot of things to be done. They say in the middle of summer. This is the wishful thinking, maybe, or anyway, that's the date that they want to put it in place. And what did you ask me about your vacation?
So maybe my vacation needs to be October. Hey, not July or August.
No, Greece is first of all the countries of the Mediterranean. They are their eye is fixed on tourism.
Right.
Because I'm sure you know the reasons. In Greece, I can tell you that the tourist season is starting on the 17th of May, and there has been some initiatives like yesterday there was this pilot tourist program that the Greek government is testing. That there is a group of Dutch people who did a negative test. They came to Rhodes, to an island. They went straight away to the all-inclusive hotel, and they're not allowed to leave this hotel, but they can visit the beach with the sea, the swimming pool. Everything is inclusive, the entertainment within the hotel. And they will be tested when they will leave the country. So if that test is a success, maybe they will consider other relevant schemes. Also, there is this, our government is really taking into consideration the duty of care of tourists, first of all. So right now there is, of tourists and the people, there is a quarantine in place. But we believe that when the tourist season starts, the measure of the restriction of quarantine will be uplifted, and there will be the negative test. And maybe they will be able. It depends on the numbers. It depends on a lot of things.
So basically, the EU digital certificate is sort of trundling along, but in the meantime, countries like Greece and presumably many other member states in the EU are inventing and pushing their own ideas and their own, strategies to try and open up and to, let people in. So basically, what we're saying to people listening to this webinar now is you need to not only pay attention to kind of broad, wider, so-called vaccine passport schemes like the digital green certificate or that type of thing, but you also need to be paying attention to each individual country's set of rules, because there's that too, right?
Exactly. And something very important to be said is that this is something new for the European Union, and this is a public health issue, and the public health is some member states have retained responsibility for securing the public health of their country. But the European Union is doing everything they can to secure the right of free movement within the European Union without any discrimination of other people visiting.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. All right. So at this point, if I am an employee and I travel frequently for business, or if I want to go on holiday, if I want to go to China, I have to get a Chinese vaccination. If I want to go to Greece, I have to go to an all-inclusive hotel. If I want to go to the EU, I have to get a digital green certificate. So there are potentially a few different. So Liam, how do I do it? How do I get it all on my phone?
Well, first of all, I suppose everybody has seen on their Facebook feeds or LinkedIn feeds over the last couple of months, friends of theirs holding up their paper certificate and showing, I just got vaccinated with the Pfizer 416 vaccine and so on. So that's where I think we have to start, because that's where the data is at the moment. So you have it in a vaccine center, goes into somebody's arm. And at the moment, in most countries, a medic is writing something down on a form. The IT systems that in the national authorities haven't really been constructed well enough yet to be able to record the information that will eventually end up being queried by a national government or an airline. I'm in Ireland, and we've had over 900,000 vaccines administered without an IT system. So that's 900,000 lines on an Excel sheet somewhere that somebody has to convert at some point in time to get it into a digital certificate environment. So that's the first difficulty, is that we're 4 months into vaccination, and these ideas and these concepts are only now coming to pass. So there's a lot of pent-up data waiting to be digitized, shall we say. Maria is correct in terms of the EU element, in that it's not actually a medical certificate. All it is confirmation that you have been vaccinated. So it's really effectively the receiving entity, either the country or the airline, or maybe even an employer at some point in the future, getting confirmation from a regulatory authority in the country of vaccination that the certificate that that person has presented, claiming to be from a medical agency, is correct and is valid. So as Maria mentioned, you can go to registered centers, be they private centers or public centers, and those companies will be issued with a digital certificate. So if anyone's had the pleasure of DocuSign or Adobe Sign over the last 6 or 9 months, you'll know that that's not the easiest thing in the world sometimes to work in terms of digital signatures if you haven't got a digital signature already. So these organizations, the first difficulty is they are, first of all, going to have to be certified by the country. So the EU will lay out a framework, and I'll talk about the EU for the moment, but the principle could apply across a global environment. And in this EU framework, this digital certification, so Authority A, Health Center B, Doctor E, or even my GP down the road, which is a small family practice, they may be issued with a digital certificate. So it's quite an issue around the ability of varying organizations of varying IT capabilities to handle certification. Then once that's created, that certificate or the key associated with that has to be made available to the receiving authority. So if I'm in Ireland and I want to travel to Maria in Greece, then the Greek authorities will have to use the digital certificate that the Irish authorities have approved. So we're going to have certificate variants in that environment. Is one issued by authority A, B, C, or D accepted? So under the digital green certificate environment in the EU, those lists supported by country A must be received by country B, and then country B obviously has to have the technology to read that certificate. So there's issues around the publication of those keys that are associated with that digital certificate, because no health data is moving. As Maria said, all Greece will be doing is querying the certificate that I present and confirming that that is a validly issued either vaccine or a recovery, and the EU are casting doubt this morning on whether the recovery element is going to be valid, or a validly issued test. So that's the handshake effectively digitally is going to be about confirmation that this is correct or not. Because at the moment, if you look at, for instance, what happened in Dover, we saw fleets of people arriving in to deliver vaccine tests, and then they trundled onto the French border, and people looked at pieces of paper and said, that's okay, now you can go on. So if you think about digitizing that process, it's somebody looking at a document and declaring that it's true. That will be automated. If anyone has been
declaring, not even declaring that it's true, declaring that it's true according to their standards. Importantly, yes, right? Because my digital certificate that Greece might think is totally great is presumably different from the test. You know, I know that for China, I would have to have my test in a test center that the Chinese government has said is totally fine, which might be completely different from the place I need to get it to go to.
Correct, and that's a secondary or tertiary issue, because the issuing authority will say that we're happy that this physical institution here is okay to administer the vaccines. That certificate for that particular issue will then go into the issuing country's database. If the receiving country doesn't respect that agency, then that's their rule of immigration to say that that's not acceptable to enter the country. It doesn't mean that I didn't have a valid certificate. Then that's where the immigration rule is going to come into play that says, that's fine. We know that you have been vaccinated according to Irish standards, UK standards, but as we are country X, we don't accept those clinics and we don't accept that. So that becomes a physical immigration issue as opposed to it's not a true test. It's true according to the issuing country, but the rules of immigration at the border guard are the rules. They'll always be the same. And what will happen then is that those countries will effectively outsource that requirement to the airlines, because if you want to enter, you have to get there first. So what happens is currently with a lot of immigration rules is that the airline is tasked with, as much as is possible, and I know the airlines are not always right in this area, but they do their best, and they're also under pain of penalty by the receiving country if they allow undocumented people to enter the country or even to get to the country's border. So in a lot of instances, we're going to see airlines tasked with confirming that signature, because it's not only going to be government to government. The EU regulation for the moment allows for an endpoint, which is an API, an automatic interface, whereby any verifying application will be able to go into the regulatory yard and confirm that the signature is valid. Again, that means KLM could go in and look and check that this certificate is valid. They're not seeing any medical data. They're just seeing that the certificate that you presented to me is valid. And therefore, I can tick off the box on the immigration rules in running into this particular. And that's where the IATA travel pass will probably win out over time, because the airlines are the biggest users of IATA services. And if IATA acts as that facilitator through their technology and presents it to the boarding gate screen, then that is the quickest and easiest way to get the information from the issuing authority to the boarding gate agent. And if you look at that environment, you can have business travelers, you can have company people who are very clever in ways of finding ways around systems. They might find a web page or a Facebook page that says, oh, I can get into country X with this. And they turn up to the airport. They might convince their employer, they might convince themselves. But if it isn't in the boarding gates system, then you're not getting on the aircraft. So that's why I think IATA in the long run will be the authority that will have the most effect. There are others, Common Pass and others, but again, that's a bit like a sort of a private company trying to grow into what is a quasi-monopoly in the IATA environment, where most airlines in the world would use IATA systems. And if you think about it, in terms of adoption, business travelers want to travel again. There is huge pent-up demand for returning to that business travel environment. And for anyone who has been at an airport recently, when you walk into the airport, there's no more automation. You have to queue now like the old days. All of that paper is being physically checked by a boarding gate agent on the land side of the airport. So before you even get towards security now, you're having to present certification, your PCR certification, and a human is checking it. And again, that also is fraught for difficulty, because that human doesn't know that clinic A, B, C, or D is valid or is a realistic certificate, or a realistic, or what I'm presenting isn't a complete forgery. So that system can't persist. So the idea of automating that will make it a much more reliable way of confirming that the person has a valid immune certificate or a recent test. And if you think of the configuration of airports over the last 10 years, everything is now driven by barcodes and automation. You do not have to queue, and business travelers and assignees always hate to queue, and the business traveler will make the most efficient use of apps to get through an airport without having to talk to anybody or touch anything by using apps and QR codes. So airports have been reconfigured. If you go there now, the traditional queuing or the traditional baggage desks all are changed now because they're designed for self-service and they're designed for automation through the gates. You put your barcode on, the gates open, you get to the security. That's a physical security environment. You get down to the gate. Even boarding the aircraft at the final piece is usually an automated process now as well. So airlines will be able to incorporate that barcode into an existing boarding pass, so that you'll have a screen, either it'll be on two of them on the one page of a smartphone, or there'll be a swipe to get my boarding pass, and then the systems can be configured to show your certification. You place your barcode on there again. So that's really the best way for it to work. But that's almost like going from, you know, Windows 98 to where we are today in a month. And that's one of the difficulties, is that you now have to make all of those issuing authorities who have probably never even heard of a digital certificate, never heard of a public key or a digital certificate key. They all have to be trained, upskilled. The IT systems have to be put in place to do that. And health systems aren't generally that well advanced. And we're talking about, this could be the GP down the road. Will China accept my small family practice GP who issues me with my vaccine in a month, 2 months time? How will that data get from my arm to a digital certificate to be accepted by an authority?
Exactly. So there's so much. That was such an amazing summary, Liam. So there's so much, because there's the concept of countries coming together to agree a unified approach, right? So EU is obviously, you know, going to be leading the way on that, because that's the entire thing that they stand for, you know, is freedom of movement and a unified approach. So there's the whole concept of a group of separate sovereign states coming together and saying, okay, we all agree that Liam's GP practice is fine. You know, like that in and of itself is pretty much a huge undertaking, let alone then you add in, does China agree, does Australia agree, does the US, and also when you consider both, you know, what it most reminds me of actually is legalizing or apostilling documents for work permit applications, where you're having to prove the authenticity and the genuineness of this document, which has been issued in some tiny little, you know, hospital or university or college or whatever in some country miles and miles away from the place it's going to be used, and you're trying to prove that it's a real thing through a unified and global system that everybody's agreed on. But that, I mean, how long did the Hague Convention on documents take to put together? I don't think it was. Probably.
And my GP will be certified by the HSE, the Health Service Executive here in Ireland. So that the governing body in the country,
exactly, so it will go up and up, right?
will say that family practice A is okay. But the difficulty there is that now family practice A has to get the kit to be able to convert the distribution of the vaccine, to digitize it, and to send it towards that government gateway so that the secondary and tertiary organizations can query it. And that's the real difficulty, is standards can be agreed, but then you've got a human element and a technological capacity to actually implement that at different levels around the world. And that's the biggest challenge. I think countries can much quicker get to the digital green certificate concept, which is basically saying, if we say this country is okay, or this issuing authority is okay, Ireland, then Greece should accept it. And the EU has that, as you say, that unification to do that. Take that principle and extend it. But the difficulty is 2 or 3 steps backwards when the vaccine is being issued. And at the moment, as we see, that's going on, that little square that everybody's holding up to the camera and saying, I've got it done. And even when people are doing that, they're displaying their name on their social media. They're displaying the batch number of the vaccine that they've been issued, and it's ripe for fraud. So they're the difficulties that I think are going to, which is why it has to come back to the national authority to be the issuing authority and say, this is correct. And apostille is a very good comparison of that, because you go to your Department of Foreign Affairs to get that document apostilled. And that costs quite a lot of money to do that. So consider. And
it takes ages. It costs loads, it takes ages. And you're actually sending bits of paper around for people to glue things onto in offices, you know.
There's just one other point to bring into that, Sophie, is that We think that pre-trip approval from a business point of view is going to become an issue, because there's going to be corporate negligence issues about sending people into locations. So now we think we're going to see a situation where corporates are going to ask, you don't have to answer, but are going to ask, have you been vaccinated? And then potentially, if that digital green certificate works, then corporates should be able to query that database then as well, so that decision makers who are sending people into those locations or sending people on assignment are getting proof from a corporate negligence point of view that this person said they were vaccinated and I checked. Whereas at the moment, it's going to be a case of, have you been vaccinated? You may not answer, and then the corporate has to make a decision. If you don't answer, again, that's another one of the big debates. Can HR stop you traveling if you haven't had a vaccine? But from a negligence point of view, companies need to understand, have you taken all the reasonable steps to ensure that this person has mitigated the risk of that person traveling to that location?
Well, you know, I also think there's an entire employment law angle, which
that's another webinar for you there.
I mean, it's a whole nother webinar, right? I mean, what if my job is traveling across the EU, but for personal or health or, you know, any personal reason that I don't necessarily want to tell people about, I can't be vaccinated. I can't do my job anymore, right? And the guy sitting next to me, maybe he's totally fine to get the vaccine, and now he gets my job because, you know, I mean, I feel like there's a whole
yes. What if you get a vaccine, but you have the Chinese vaccine, let's say, and you're coming to Greece, and Greece doesn't accept and the person next to you has done the AstraZeneca vaccination and can get the green certificate and can go anywhere.
Exactly. And if I'm the boss, do I split my staff? Do I say, okay, 50 of you are getting the Chinese vaccine, I'm sending you guys to China. These other 50 can have the Moderna. You can go to the US. You know, I mean, it doesn't really, So look, we have literally 3 minutes
already
left.
I mean, it's already happening in some industry where if you are the frontline worker and you choose not to be, you know, vaccinated, then they may have to transfer you to another department or another area that you don't have to face the risk of receiving visitors from other countries, for example. So it's already been going on. I think this morning when I watched the news about in New Zealand, they're doing the same thing. They're saying that you might be transferred or you might lose your job.
Yeah. And it's been, you know, it's been a lot in the news in the UK about health workers as well in care homes and that kind of thing. So guys, if you had to, we only have a couple of minutes. If you had to, if you could try and give one piece of advice to somebody, a person in HR who's having to look down the barrel of having this sort of discussion with their colleagues, with their employees, what would you say to them? Voon, what's your tip?
Well, I think, you know, the first thing is to get yourself vaccinated. And I think the border is going to slowly open, but by slowly, you know, I think the mutual or bilateral discussions have been going on with many countries in the region. And I'm hopeful that the border is going to open by year end. And I think for Singapore, I think we're looking into the third quarter. Hopefully that when we have 75% or 80% of the population vaccinated, then we would be able to open the door and receive more visitors and business people.
Yeah. Okay. And Maria, what would you advise people if they were trying to plan for travel and all of these vaccine certificates?
The question was the same as the one you did to Voon, or yeah?
Yeah. If you had to give one piece of advice in 10 seconds?
I would say on a case by case. I would speak to the person that had to travel, because right now things are very difficult all around the planet, just to make sure that they're happy traveling. And then I would see to how I could secure best his welfare, his health, and how not to spread the virus. I mean,
Yeah. So you would look at it case by case. Too soon to try and have some one size fits all.
Too soon.
Yeah, too soon.
And Sophie, just to say, because I've been reading a little bit in the chat, and there has been some very interesting questions. But I think that for many things, things are still very early and there's a lot of discussions, and yeah, the world is facing something that has never faced before, so we need time to.
It feels to me like people are talking, we're talking, you know, things are kind of being talked about openly and in public, this digital green certificate, way earlier than any type of, you know, than this type of thing would ever normally be discussed. You know, I mean, clearly from the very beginning, I mean, what you were saying, Adrian, clearly we don't even know if the vaccines actually, but I mean, we do know the vaccines don't really stop people giving each other COVID anyway, you know, so it's clearly far too early to be talking about a magic QR code that will mean that we can all go back to normal. But yet the discussions have to happen out in the open and in public because people are so completely desperate for
to live again. Don't be afraid to say it.
yeah. Liam, what's your tip for the top?
I think there'll be more than enough people ready to travel, willing to travel. It depends on the scale of the organization. You know, where organizations have skill sets across multiple groups, that will be a self-selection environment. I think regular business travelers will come back much quicker, for instance, than an occasional assignee. So assignees may be different, but I think business travelers are more akin to using apps to, I mean, there's the political or the medical issue about whether you receive the vaccine or not. One of those issues then from a HR point of view has got to be, you know, is there somebody else who could go and do that as well? And companies will make that decision, I'm afraid, whether it's fair or not. That's the decision that companies are likely to make. So the technology will come there eventually, but I think people will make that decision. And when you get to that airport, do you want to queue on the left hand side and show pieces of paper, or do you want to go through the automatic gates and get quicker to where you want to be? They're some of the decisions that are out there. For anyone who wants some light reading, I've put in the chat the actual EU document there. So if you really want to read 16 pages of technical jargon, help yourself there.
Oh, I like it's got interoperability in the file name. That's good. Adrian, what's your closing?
Well, I mean, I think overall, every single day something has surprised me about this virus. Literally every single day something new has come up, and when we thought we were getting there, then suddenly variants arrive. If 2020 was the year of the pandemic and 2021 was the hope of vaccines, 2022 we feel we're starting to conquer it, and hopefully 2023 we see the back of COVID. But the only way to do that really is to spread vaccines around the world. And you know, vaccines by themselves I don't think are enough, to be honest. I think we need treatments as well, treatments out of hospital that you can get if you test positive. You take a treatment orally, nasally, and that stops you getting severe disease or disease at all. So that's the end. I think we've got years of this to come, and we have to have things like immune certificates to help everyone to move around in this and to get back to a normal kind of life. So I think that they're very important, but it's up to governments, businesses to work out how they use these immunity certificates and get things moving.
So they're coming, but they're not coming right now. They're starting now, but we're looking down a long, long road.
They're inevitable and they're needed, but we have to work how to use them properly.
Yeah. Well, I have learned so much. Thank you so much, all of you. I think you're brilliant. And thank you everybody for listening and for chatting. And that's it from us. Goodbye.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.